Have you ever felt too young at work? Maybe people thought they were complimenting you by pointing out how young you look, or they made condescending comments that made you feel different or unwelcome. This week, I'm talking with Leslie Alvarez, community management leader and author of the book, When Life Gives You Lemons, Make Tamales. Here, Leslie shares her experience of regularly being made to feel too young. Having graduated from high school at 15, built a career in her teens, and had her first child at 20, Leslie has consistently encountered people and situations that have made her feel too young. We also explore how she's learned to manage these insecurities and what she recommends to others with similar experiences. Thank you so much, as always, for listening. Welcome to the Impostor Syndrome Files. My name is Kim Meninger, and as an executive coach and former high-tech leader, my personal mission is to help professionals overcome imposter syndrome so that you can advance your career with confidence. Each week, I interview a new guest who brings a powerful perspective to this conversation, including personal stories, best practices, and new insights. The more we talk about this issue, the more we destigmatize imposter syndrome, recognize that we're not alone, and empower ourselves to access the tools and resources that can help us and those around us. Thank you so much for listening and for sharing with others you think would benefit from this conversation. Welcome, Leslie. I'm so excited to have you here. I can't wait to jump in. I would love to start by inviting you to introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Kim. I'm so grateful that you're having me here on your show. My name is Leslie Alvarez, and I have been a victim of imposter syndrome forever, it seems like. I actually, the Cliff Notes version of my life is I graduated high school when I was 15, got into the world of business and started working at 16, and was consistently always the youngest person in the room. That combined with my lack of college education, just really made me feel, even though I kept excelling, to be less than qualified, or to feel like I needed to try a little harder to be able to be successful and to prove myself to people. I even when I raised my kids, I was the youngest mom in the room. I had my daughter at 20. And so here I was bringing her to kindergarten at the age of 25, and I'm the youngest mom. And, I looked more like I was her older sister. So it seems to have permeated my whole life, I guess, because I moved so quickly in my youth that it just kind of, it went through a whole series of personal, business, career, all of that. It just seems to have affected me.
So how did you graduate at 15?
I actually left public school after 8th grade and did homeschool. And I was that kid that on a Saturday would just stay home and knock out all of Algebra 2 in one weekend and just be done. And then not do any schoolwork for a week or two, and then knock out all of English 2. And I just knocked it all out and got done in a matter of a couple of years. And then I was done.
Wow. And then what was your career like? Like, what were you doing?
So when I turned 16, I got a job at a law firm where I was the assistant to the senior partner. I ran everyone's payroll. That was awkward because, again, all these 30, 40-year-old women, paralegals, and people are looking at me like, who does she think she is, right? Like, I'm controlling office supplies and their paychecks and know how much money they made, but I was only 16, 17. I left the legal side when I was 19, and I moved into property management, community association management specifically. So I manage HOAs and condominium associations. And by the time I was 21, I was managing one of the former President Bush's community. Very high end communities. And I was so young that, people would make comments all the time about my age and that I looked too young. And I would just say, oh, I'm legal in every way that matters for this conversation. Like, I would just try to blow it off and make a joke about it. But the reality of it is, I was very insecure about it because I was surrounded by 30-year-olds and 40-year-olds and people with degrees on the wall and everything. And I'm telling these millionaires oftentimes what they can and what kind of, tree they can plant in front of their house. I mean, it was just kind of, I had to step it up and really be more assertive, I guess.
Yeah, which is really hard. I think it's really hard for women in general, especially you're talking about lots of different ways in which you felt different from people, which is always a trigger of imposter syndrome. But feeling younger, that much younger than the people around you when you have a position of authority in many ways, right? You have the ability to say no to them. That's got to be a really intimidating situation to be in.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's so many different triggers to imposter syndrome. And I think I kind of had all of them. I was a super smart kid, hence I graduated early, but I didn't have the college education, right? So a lack of education. I had the youth, the age against me. And, I always say that, and I still get attacked for that. Like just the other day, I had a sales meeting with a potential client and they criticized me for looking too young, not once, but like a half a dozen times in an hour-long presentation, to the point where I was just like, okay, what, like if I was, a male at my age, in the prime of I'd be in the prime of my life, right? But because I'm a female at my age, I'm 46, I happen to have taken care of my skin and be in good shape. I'm suddenly criticized for not having enough experience because I look too young. Like it just doesn't make any sense. But so it seems like I'm still constantly fighting that fight. But now I realize it's just more bias than anything, and I don't feel that that's much more maturity. But when you're in your 20s, that's just massive. I mean, when people come up to you and say, "Oh, you remind me of my daughter," or you remind me of myself at your age, like that's not a compliment
Yeah.
to that person, to that young professional. You're putting them in a position of uncomfortableness. You think you're building commonality with them, but the reality of it is you're actually alienating them because they don't have that sense of commonality with you. They don't have that experience.
That's right. You're absolutely right. And there's and can be an element of condescension to it as well. You're almost delegitimizing somebody by saying, "Oh, yeah, I remember way back when I was your age."
Or
Right?
you're too young to remember this band. Well, you don't know what I know and what I don't know. I was raised by my grandmother. You know what I mean? And I'm a Katharine Hepburn, Audrey Hepburn, old school classic, person. You don't know what I know and what I don't know. Don't project that on people just because they look young or because their age is young. You just don't know.
No, you're absolutely right. That happened to me in my early 40s. I was having a conversation about potentially doing some work for an organization. They're like, "We're sorry, but we just can't put you in front of our clients. You look too young. They won't take you seriously." I'm like, I'm in my 40s. Right?
How much older do I have to get to be able? I mean, I said this after that client meeting. Are you telling me that I would be considered more credible if I was 30 pounds overweight and I looked haggard and my gray hair was showing? I mean, I don't know what else to say, but I mean, a man at my age would never be told that he was looked too young if he was in good shape and he was 46 years old and still attractive. He's in the prime of his life.
That's
Like,
You're right. And for women, I feel like we're too young until all of a sudden we're too old, right? Like there's
yeah,
no
there's a switch, then it just gets flipped. Yeah, it's insane.
Yeah.
But I mean, even as a mom, I mean, I put my kids in school, and again, I had my daughter at 20, I had my son at 23. I was surrounded by moms because I lived out in the suburbs. I was surrounded by moms that had their kids in their 30s.
Mm,
So, I was always that younger mom in the group. And that was always even a little more awkward, right? Because then they would kind of look at you like or you felt like they looked at you. Maybe they weren't, but you felt like they were looking at you kind of like, like she's young, she's inexperienced, she doesn't know what she's doing, or how I raise my kid is not their way of raising their kid. They can use that as criticism. So it permeated my whole life. It really did.
or they think you're the nanny.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or they think I'm trying to hit on their father, their husband or something. I mean, just, you know what I mean? I mean, it can go all over the place, and get really uncomfortable very quickly.
Well, and I think the thing that you're pointing out, and I want to dig a little bit more deeply into too, is that I'm sure there were a lot of people around you who didn't say things like that, but the people who do stay in your head, right? And it becomes part of your own narrative and the way you see yourself in relationship to other people. So even if you are in the room and no one's saying it, there's still this fear that people are thinking it, right? So can you say more about how it affected you just more pervasively as you were going through your career? Like, were there things that you didn't share, for example, because you were worried about what people were going to think? Like, what were some of the things you did or didn't do?
I dated a guy and that was 20 years older than me and he didn't know what my age was for 2 years. I
Wow.
mean, I stopped telling people how old I was because I didn't want to hear the story. I didn't actually start owning my age until I turned 40. And that was when I was like, at 39, I was like, road to 40, hashtag, hashtag road to 40, hashtag road to 40. And at that point, I was like, I can own this age because this is a fair age, right? This is a respectable age. And the other ages, I felt like I was just too young and I didn't want to share with anybody. I just kept it all to myself. And, yeah, I mean, it was tough. And I think that we, it made every part of my of every relationship, business and personal, a little more uncomfortable because I felt slightly out of place. And yeah, it definitely took over my inner narrative.
Mm. So you had mentioned feeling like you needed to be more assertive. I mean, it's hard to do this stuff on your own. Did you have someone around you that you saw as a mentor? Like, how did you get to a better place with your
So, yeah, you're right. And that was a big thing, right? It I feel like I did have to become a little more assertive, a little more vocal. I mean, I was already a vocal person, but I did feel like I needed to stand my ground more, which probably also, created issues with certain relationships and even in, my career because I was more, I was just more vocal and had enough and felt like I needed to be a little louder and a little more assertive in what I said, a little more aggressive in how I handled things to be able to get my point across. Otherwise, I wasn't going to be taken seriously. And so that probably created, some workflow problems for me in my relationships business wise. When I was younger, that could have been avoided had I not had to feel that way. But it was tough, and it sometimes, like I said, it still happens now.
Mm. Yeah, and it's interesting because that whole idea of you're needing to be more sort of, so you were almost overcompensating by being more aggressive. And we know that the double bind, right? That you can be likable or competent, but it's really hard to be both. And so you're often seen as too soft or too tough, right?
Correct. Yeah, exactly. And I think that has definitely caused me issues in my career. And I have spent the last, I say since I turned 40, trying to be more approachable. That's what I call it. My hairstylist, when I get my hair done, we make a joke. She's like, "Are we trying to be approachable this month?" And I'm like, "Yes, we're trying to be approachable. So we're going to add some new layers. We're going to add some softening highlights. My hair was pitch black. I have pitch black dark hair. I have dark brown eyes, dark black hair, and that can be very severe, especially when you're more aggressive. And so I started trying to lighten my hair and I wear white now instead of red and black and things like that, so trying to be a little softer and more and
It just, I mean, I guess the question that comes up for me as you're saying that too is how do you balance, and I'm not a big fan of this word, but like how do you balance authenticity with strategy, right? So you're talking about being, you're being strategic about how you're showing up, but I wonder how much of that feels performative to you versus you're just bringing out a different side of yourself and what effect that has on your confidence.
well, actually, if I actually feel a lot better. I feel like you said, it brings out a different side to me that people haven't really seen, right? Because they don't give me the chance to be soft. Because I'm so used to they're so used to me being aggressive, and in the business world and such. So I enjoy it. And but again, I do think that it's a strategy of you have to think. I think as a woman, you have to think strategic about everything constantly. I think in the business world, especially, I look the night before at my calendar for the next day and plan out my outfit based on that meeting. Who am I meeting with? Is it a more casual meeting? Is this a more formal meeting? Do I need to go, if I'm meeting with a group of, females, then I'm probably going to be able to be a little more casual, a little more myself. If I'm going to be meeting with a group of high network, males, I probably need to go in there with a little more of a power suit, right? So I have to be very strategic, and I've always done that because I just felt that was really important.
Do you feel like you're still, I mean, nobody ever feels like they've reached the pinnacle of confidence, right? But do you feel like it's still a struggle for you, or do you feel like you're more getting into your own at this point, right?
I'm more into my own at this point. I will say in the last 2 years, I've had a ton of personal growth. Well, probably more like 5 years. I've had a ton of personal growth that I have really begun to be more of my own authentic self. That's really brought out the ability to share my story. As a single mom, most of my kids' life, and my son had an accident. Right before he turned 18, and it was a very, very severe issue. I almost lost him. And that really helped to open my eyes up about, needing to be more in the moment, and really focus on making sure that I'm being who I really want to be. Right. And I felt like there was a reason why I had struggled all these years, and dealt with what I had dealt with, especially imposter syndrome. That was, and there was a reason why I'm vocal. There's a reason why why I like to speak. I enjoy speaking. I enjoy talking to others, and I don't mind sharing my story. Some people don't like to share their story because they were raised to keep it to themselves, and they're just very private, and that's okay. But they like to hear someone else's story so that they know they're not alone. And so I feel like there's a reason I went through all of this is because, and the reason is that it's because I can then share my story and am able to speak to others and help others to know that they're not alone, and that it's going to be okay, that they can get through it. And also to help others, now at my older age, at my advanced age of 46, I too find myself sometimes in a room. I was at a conference last week, and the people, the guys that were at the conference, I mean, they looked so young, and people were commenting on how young they looked. And I agree, they looked young, but I said to everybody, I'm not going to say anything. And because can you imagine how they don't want to hear that? They've heard it, like their whole career, and that's just not, going to help them at all. They obviously are qualified. They obviously know what they're talking about, and we should just, listen to them. It was a software conference. And so I told that story multiple times to people every time I heard somebody talking about how young somebody looked, because I felt like it was my place to remind them that that's not an okay thing. Yes, they look young. Okay, but that doesn't mean they're not qualified. There's a reason why they have the job. There's a reason why they're here, and we're just going to leave it at that. Let's not make everybody feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, and it's interesting how, well, youth in particular, not necessarily, we wouldn't necessarily do that with, wow, they look so old, right? We would only do it in the reverse of they look so young. But that's like one physical characteristic that we feel really comfortable being really open and judgy
Yeah.
about. Whereas
Yeah.
other situations we would keep our mouths shut. So it's interesting that we feel
Right.
have permission to make those kind of comments.
And it's literally one of the only things that a person can't control.
Right.
Can't control your age, right? I mean, you can get, facial corrections and Botox and things like that to make yourself look younger, to make yourself look older, to change your nose, to do all these things. But the one thing you can't control is your age, right? And so it's something that somebody is complete. You can go to college, you can get your education, you can do all that, you can fix those things. The one thing that you can't control, you're going to criticize the worst and make somebody feel less than capable or competent. It's just, it's not fair.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because you mentioned having the or wanting, I guess, to tell your story and having the opportunity to share with others. And I feel like your willingness to step in those moments and just say, hey, time out, right? Like maybe this isn't the best way to approach people or think about people goes a long way, because sometimes it just takes somebody interrupting that to make people realize, like, oh, maybe I shouldn't respond this way, right? So it sounds like in your own world, we obviously can't control everything, but in your own world, you're using your own experience to help other people think differently about how they're interacting.
Absolutely. That's definitely my goal. And again, I went back to school as an adult. I did get my college degree. Now I have the student loan debt to go along with it, so I'm part of America. Yay. Um, but nobody can say I don't have the degree, right? It's like it's on the wall. But so I eliminated that, and yet I still, just a few weeks ago, like I said earlier, get criticized for looking too young. I mean, I mean, it's just one of those things that you just kind of like, okay. But again, I mean, it's everybody has something.
Yeah.
Everybody has something. And what I think is, imposter syndrome, we like to give labels to things and we like to call things syndrome. But the reality of it is this is just human nature. We're going to all second guess ourselves, and we second guess ourselves every single day. And it's important that we keep in mind what wins we have had, so that we remind ourselves when we start going down that rabbit hole of second guessing ourselves of why that, is not, appropriate, and why we know we're successful, and dig ourselves, keep ourselves out of that rut, because you can go down that rut and you can, end up, really upset over whatever your cause of your feelings is. And, it's all in your head. It's all in your head. It's an issue of your own making, right? Whether there's outside influences that are creating this as well and putting it into your head, but ultimately you control what lives in your head. And so you have to put the positive reminders in your head, so that when those negative comments or reminders pop up, you're able to push them aside and focus on the positive and dig yourself out of it.
Well, and you're reminding me of the Eleanor Roosevelt quote, like, no one can make you feel inferior without your consent, right? And so this idea that there are going to be people out there who will judge you for any number of things, but we also have the opportunity to reject that, right? And to adopt a different narrative about who we are. And so
Right.
do you have specific practices that you use or things that help you to stay connected to that when your mind goes to that place of, oh no, right, I don't feel legitimate or
Well, the first thing I do is I have to vent, right? I have to get it out of my chest. I have to say it. I have to tell somebody my story, whether it's my sister, my son, my daughter. I have to tell somebody what just happened so that I get it off my chest, and then it's out there, right? Because I'm frustrated by it and it's irritating me that this person said this or did that, or I didn't win the account because this person felt whatever. And so I get it off my chest. I say it, I tell it, I vent. And then for the most part, I've learned to try to let it go after that. It might live there for a little bit longer, but at that point, it's like, once I've gotten it off my chest, I say, okay, now I can move on. Now I can focus on the next, because there's another one that's coming around the corner for me. And I try to keep that positive and keep, like I said, a list of successes that I can run over in my head when I need to talk myself out of it and talk myself off the ledge, so to speak. But I believe that that list of successes is really important, to be able to remind yourself that, you are good and you are successful.
yeah, and I often recommend that too, to keep a list of your accomplishments, because I think that even just keeping track of them trains your brain to think about yourself differently, because we do tend to notice all the negatives and not notice the positives. But if you're focused and you're putting down all of the positive things that you're doing, it just helps you to notice things that would otherwise slip right by you.
Right. Right. Yeah. And sometimes the wins are little, and that's okay. you
Mm.
know but when you get knocked, I'm a firm believer that when you get knocked off at the knees and you're on the floor, you need to honor the feeling that you're feeling, whatever that feeling is. And that's when I tell my story, repeat it to somebody, vent, get it off my chest, that I'm frustrated by this. I can't believe this happened. I've overcome so much and yet I'm still, getting this kind of comments. But then you plot your comeback and you start thinking, while you're on the floor still, you've got to be thinking about your next steps. And I believe in having a backup plan for my backup plan
Mhm.
and just constantly, always thinking 2 steps ahead. That's kind of the property manager in me too, right? Because, I've got to be constantly, looking for a solution. And if something fails, then what's the next backup for that? So
Yeah, and I wonder now that you've gotten to this place where you're stronger, you're more confident, do you have any additional advice for people who are younger now, who are going through some of this that might help them shortcut some of what you've gone through?
yeah, again, like we already talked about it, keeping that list of successes is definitely important. And the list is going to grow. Find yourself a mentor, somebody who can understand what you're dealing with, somebody like me that's been through it that you can use to talk through it and bounce the ideas of how you want to handle certain situations. So find somebody that's gone through a similar situation, whether it's lack, coming from a low economic background, having a lack of college education, whether it's an issue of age, whatever your issue that makes you feel less than equal to everyone else. Find someone that has that is advanced further along than you are so that you can go back to them and pick their brain, vent to them in a safe space where that it's not going to be, used against you later on. That's the worst thing is when you share with somebody and then they come back and hurt you with it. So find somebody that's safe that you can talk to.
Yeah, that's a really good point too, is somebody that you can trust. And everything is in how you look at it, right? Because all of the people sort of looking at you and thinking how young you are could also be thinking like, wow, look at how far she's come in such a short time, right? Like you could say, that's amazing that she has, gotten to this point at such a young age. And so, I think a lot of it is in the frame we adopt. And it's hard because oh, bless you, we're always going to be, as humans, right? We're always going to care about what other people think. It's part of our design. But I also
Sure.
think it's important to recognize that when people say things like that to us, they're really revealing more about themselves than anything else. It really doesn't have anything to do with us. And so maybe that's their insecurity about them feeling old in relationship to you.
Well, when I was a little girl, I had a lot of mean girls around me. And my grandmother used to always tell me they're just jealous of you, right? And I don't know about you, but you probably heard that from your mother or grandmother as well. And you always think that your mother or your grandmother's crazy, right? Like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, everybody's so jealous of me. Like, what have I got that they don't have? Like, you know what I mean? Like, you just think of like, yeah, okay, whatever. But the reality of it is as you get older, you realize there is a lot of jealous people out there, and there are people that are very insecure, and your sense of confidence or your success can threaten them, and it does create a jealousy issue. So it is a true fact, and you do have to sometimes just recognize that it's not about you, it's about them, it's what they're dealing with.
You're absolutely right. And I think, I always say true confidence is quiet. Like if you really believe in yourself, you don't need to put other people down in order to feel better about yourself. And so it doesn't make it any less unpleasant or painful when you're dealing with people like that. But I do think it's important to process it as that's about them, like we're talking about, right? And really try as hard as you can not to let it infiltrate your own story.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, this has been so fantastic, Leslie. I've never done a conversation like this around age. So I know there are a lot of young people listening, and I know how many of them are feeling this way because I was one of them myself too, as always looking younger and always being the youngest person in the room when I was starting out my career. So this is just so helpful to think about how to navigate this. And any final thoughts?
My daughter's actually going through this now. So she's 26 and she's, got her MBA and all of that. And she's going through it. So yeah, I think that it's a very it's timely all the time, right? Because there's always somebody that's going through this issue. But I wrote my book, When Life Gives You Lemons, Make Tamales, and that's where this is based on. It's based on my life. It's based on being a single mom, really just trying to make things happen for the kids all the years. It's on Amazon if anybody is interested in that. And I have a second book that's going to be coming out in 2025. It's going to be called Hot Mess Express. And that's all about overcoming life's curveballs and grief when you've suffered loss. So it's going to take a little different of a turn in the conversation. But again, like I said, I think we're all constantly evolving. We're all learning. And gosh, when you're in your 20s and people in their 40s are saying you have no idea, just I tell you, until you get to the things that we all deal with each day, it definitely does grow you, give you growth and expansion and teach you so much as we experience life and go through life. So I think that we have a lot to share, and we need to share and help others as much as we can, and be open to hearing from others, because it can help us in ways that we just don't even realize.
I think that's a really important point too. And wisdom does not just come with age, right? We each have vastly different experiences that influence who we are and how we show up in the world. There's so much we can learn from each other. And to just make assumptions based on superficial information, like someone's age or how they look, we're missing a lot. And so I think
absolutely,
I really appreciate your bringing this out into the world and being an inspiration to others who have struggled in this way. And so you mentioned your books. Is there anywhere else you would want to point people to learn more about you or to connect with you?
Well, I do have a website, lesliealvarez.com. So LESLIE Alvarez, ALVAREZ.com. Yes. And you can reach out to me there, schedule a call. I am available for speaking and presentations, and all of that's available on the website.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Leslie. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kim. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks so much for listening to the Impostor Syndrome Files. If you would like to continue this conversation in a safe and trusted space, I would love for you to join my virtual discussion group every Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern. For the past several years, the group has been limited to women, but it is now open, regardless of gender, to anyone who is interested in exploring and troubleshooting common workplace challenges, building better awareness of ourselves and others, and becoming more inclusive allies at work. Check out the show notes for more info on how to find us, and please join us next week for another episode of the Impostor Syndrome Files.